the shockwave of your silence. There are moments in life when the loudest thing in the room is the sound you didn't make, not the words you spoke, not the accusations you hurled, not the explanations you rehearsed in your mind, but the silence, the absence, the sudden, sharp withdrawal of everything they once relied on to keep you predictable. And here's the thing no one tells you. For some people, especially the ones who have spent years building walls so high even they can't see over them, your silence doesn't just sting, it terrifies them. It changes the power dynamic they thought they controlled. It becomes a mirror they can't look away from. You might have believed they weren't paying attention all along, that your tears rolled past them unnoticed, that your pleas for connection hit a brick wall and crumbled to dust. And maybe you were right. In the moment, they didn't seem to hear you. They didn't seem to care. They brushed you off with a shrug. Or worse, they acted like you were the problem for wanting more. But silence is different. It's not a storm they can weather by putting on noise-canceling headphones. It's not a conversation they can twist, redirect, or avoid. Silence is a vacuum, and in that vacuum, their own thoughts become deafening. When you stopped speaking, when you stopped chasing, when you stopped explaining yourself for the thousandth time, they lost their grip on the script. The lines they'd rehearsed, the dismissive ones. The defensive ones suddenly had no scene to belong to. They were ready for your anger. They were ready for your sadness. They weren't ready for your nothing, because nothing leaves space. And space is where truth starts to echo. Avoidance. The ones who pull away when closeness threatens to melt. Their armor rely on a certain dance. You reach out. They retreat. You get hurt. They minimize. You try harder. They step back even further. They've done it so many times it feels like muscle memory. But when you stopped reaching out, you broke the rhythm. You disrupted the choreography that made them feel safe in their distance. And here's what they'll never admit, not to you, and often not even to themselves. The moment your silence entered the room, they felt something they hadn't felt in a long time. A loss of control. It's not just that they noticed you were quiet. It's that they noticed themselves in a way they'd been avoiding for years. Without your voice filling the space, they were left with their own, and for someone who's built their life around avoiding their deepest emotions. That's not just uncomfortable, it's unbearable. Your silence did what your words never could. It bypassed their defenses. It slipped past the walls. It hit them in the one place they'd buried so deep they thought it was untouchable. And maybe you didn't even mean for it to. Maybe you just got tired. Tired of being the only one fighting. Tired of throwing your heart against a locked door. Tired of hearing your own voice plead for something that should have been freely given. But here's the irony. The moment you stopped speaking was the moment they started listening, not to you, but to the ache inside them they'd spent a lifetime running from. Silence has a weight to it. It's not passive. It's not neutral. It's active in its own way, pressing down, forcing reflection, exposing cracks that words could never reach. And the person who once made you feel invisible, they feel it more than you think. Not because they've suddenly become emotionally available, but because silence changes the emotional playing field in ways they never prepared for. When you were speaking, when you were explaining, pleading, or even arguing, they still felt in control. They could tell themselves you were being too much, too emotional, too sensitive. It's easy to minimize someone when they're still showing up, still investing energy, still proving they care. But silence flips the script. Now they're the ones who have to wonder, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? Where did your attention go? If you're not focused on them, who is holding the space they once occupied? It's unsettling, deeply unsettling for someone who's built an identity around being the one who decides the distance in the relationship. Suddenly, that distance isn't theirs to control anymore. You've taken it into your own hands. And this is where the avoidant mind begins to spiral. They don't necessarily show it on the outside. In fact, many will double down on their detached facade. But inside, they're running scenarios. They're imagining you moving on. They're wondering if someone else is now hearing your voice, seeing your smile, feeling the warmth they took for granted. Here's what's fascinating and a little heartbreaking. The very same person who pulled away from you when you were close will suddenly feel a pull toward you when you stop reaching. It's not necessarily love in the way you wanted it. It's not necessarily a change of heart. It's the loss of control, the break in the pattern, the uncomfortable reminder that you are not an endless supply of effort and affection. In psychology, there's a term called object constancy. It's the ability to hold onto the emotional sense of someone even when they're not physically present. Many people with avoidant attachment struggle with this. When you're out of sight, it's almost like you don't exist. Until, of course, you really don't exist in their world anymore. That's when they start to feel the emptiness. And your silence? It creates that emptiness in high definition. They start noticing things. The lack of messages on their phone. The absence of your name in their notifications. The way their days feel slightly different. Like a background noise they'd tuned out is suddenly gone. And now they can't unhear the quiet. This is the paradox of the avoidant. They crave space until space feels like abandonment. They run from closeness until the absence of closeness feels like a wound. And when your silence arrives, it doesn't feel like peace to them. It feels like something's gone wrong. But here's the part you might not realize. Your silence is not just about them. It's about you reclaiming your energy. It's about you deciding that you will no longer pour into someone who refuses to meet you in the middle. It's about you choosing your dignity over their dysfunction. At first, it may not feel empowering. Silence can be lonely. You might second-guess yourself, wondering if you're being petty or cold or just like them. But the truth is, silence isn't about punishment. It's about boundaries. When you've spoken your truth 100 times and been met with indifference or defensiveness, the most self-respecting thing you can do is stop talking. Not because you don't care, but because you do about yourself. And in that moment, something profound happens. The same silence that feels like self-preservation to you becomes a reckoning for them, a mirror, a rupture in the narrative they've been telling themselves about who holds the power in the relationship. They may not run back immediately. They may not admit they're feeling anything at all. But inside, there's a quiet panic, a sense that maybe they've gone too far this time, a dawning realization that the person they thought would always be there might not be. That's the shockwave of your silence. It doesn't just disrupt the present. It makes them reconsider the past and fear the future. And the best part? You didn't have to raise your voice. You didn't have to beg. You didn't have to explain your worth one more exhausting time. You just stopped. And in doing so, you spoke volumes. The shift they didn't expect. When you finally went quiet, it wasn't planned. It wasn't a strategy. It wasn't some calculated move to make them miss you. It was exhaustion. It was the kind of silence that grows after you've tried everything else. You had spoken, explained, reasoned, pleaded. You had given them every chance to meet you halfway. And each time, you were met with distance. Or worse, indifference. So you stopped. Not because you didn't care, but because you realized you couldn't keep caring for the both of you. In that silence, something shifted. At first, they didn't notice. They thought it was just another one of those quiet spells. They assumed, like always, that you'd come back. that you'd be the one to bridge the gap. But days passed, and you didn't. Silence has a weight they weren't prepared for. When you were speaking, they could avoid listening. When you were reaching out, they could pull away. When you were asking, they could ignore the question. But when you went quiet, there was nothing to push against. No words to reject. No voice to tune out. They were left alone with the one thing they've always tried to escape: their own thoughts. Here's what most people don't understand. Avoidants don't just fear closeness. They fear the mirror that closeness holds up. They fear seeing themselves through your eyes. And when you're silent, that mirror doesn't go away. It just moves inside their own head. Suddenly, they start replaying your last words. They start hearing the tone you used. They start wondering if you meant something more. Silence becomes a presence. It fills the room where your voice used to be. It sits beside them at the table. It rides with them in the car. They may not admit it, but they feel it. They feel the absence of the one person who always made the first move. And here's the part they'll never tell you. That absence starts to hurt when the stillness starts to echo. At first, they told themselves they liked the quiet. They told themselves it was peaceful, that they were better off without the constant conversations, the check-ins, the invitations to connect. They thought silence meant freedom. But freedom without connection quickly turns into something else: emptiness. Days stretch out differently without your presence. Not because they suddenly miss everything about you, but because the small ways you once filled their life are now missing. No good morning. No did you get home okay. No little observations about your day. The silence they thought they wanted starts to feel heavier. And heaviness has a way of making you notice just how light things used to be. Avoidants often believe they can control their feelings by controlling their distance. If they pull away, they think they can stop themselves from needing you. But your silence flips that script. Now, they're the one noticing the gap. They're the one aware of the space. They're the one wondering when you'll break it and why you haven't. Here's the thing about emotional absence. It doesn't stay neutral. It amplifies. The longer it lasts, the more it gets filled with assumptions, memories, and unspoken questions. And while they may try to act unaffected, inside, your stillness has started a conversation. They can't escape. They begin to test you in subtle ways. A short message, a vague comment online, a sudden reminder of something you once shared. It's not really about the message. It's about seeing if you'll take the bait, if you'll prove that they still matter, if you'll make the silence easier to live with. But you don't. And that's when something in them starts to crack. When you stop giving them the comfort of your pursuit, you also stop shielding them from the discomfort of their own avoidance. And slowly, the armor they've spent years building begins to feel less like protection and more like a cage. When their defenses turn against them, silence was supposed to be their safe place. It was supposed to protect them from needing you too much, from feeling exposed, from risking rejection. But safety can feel a lot like loneliness when it lasts too long. At first, they told themselves they didn't notice your absence, that they were simply busy, that life goes on. They filled their days with distractions, scrolling, work, surface-level conversations with people who couldn't touch the deeper parts of them. They told themselves this was fine, but fine is a thin blanket in the middle of winter. It doesn't actually keep you warm. The truth is, avoidants build their walls to keep pain out. But walls don't know how to filter. They keep everything out: the hurt, the joy, the love, the possibility. And the longer those walls stand, the more they start to feel like prison bars. Your silence did something they didn't expect. It didn't chase them. It didn't try to prove its worth. It simply existed, without explanation, without apology. without an opening for them to escape into blame or defensiveness. It forced them to sit with what they had been running from. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, their fear of closeness had cost them something irreplaceable. And here's where it gets cruel for them. When the walls no longer feel like safety, but they've lived inside them for so long that stepping outside feels impossible. It's the kind of stuck feeling that keeps a person awake at night, replaying memories they swore they didn't care about. They start noticing the small ways you used to bridge the gap, the way you would reach out first, the way you never seemed to mind their distance, the way your presence made the world feel softer. Now those bridges are gone, and they don't know how to build new ones. This is the turning point, not when they suddenly become open, but when their old strategies stop working. The silence they once used to keep control has become the silence that controls them. When silence becomes the loudest thing they hear, there's a point where silence stops being background noise. It stops being something they can ignore. It becomes the only thing they can hear. For an avoidant, this moment is terrifying, not because of you, but because of what your silence forces them to see about themselves. They start to realize it's not that you stopped speaking, it's that they never learned how to listen. Avoidance thrives in the noise of everyday life. The constant movement, the endless to-do lists, the half-hearted connections that require no risk. But silence has no distractions. It strips away the excuses, the self-protective stories, the illusions that keep them feeling in control. And when all of that is gone, they're left with one unshakable truth. They miss you, not in the way people miss convenience, but in the way people miss a part of themselves they didn't know they'd lost. They remember the way your presence made the air feel different, the way your voice softened the edges of their day, the way you looked at them without asking them to be more than they could give, yet somehow inspired them to want to be more anyway. Now that's gone, not in anger, not in punishment, but in a quiet, irreversible shift. And here's the thing about that shift. It's the one thing they can't undo by simply coming back. Because what's changed isn't your availability. It's your energy. They might try to test the waters. A casual message, a sudden just thought of you, an attempt to pull you back into the dance where they lead with distance. And you follow with effort. But something in you has changed too. You've learned that peace is worth more than proximity. That silence, when it comes from a place of self-respect, isn't the absence of love. It's the presence of boundaries. And here's where the final shift happens for you. You stop waiting for them to break their own walls. You stop standing at the edge, hoping they'll let you in. You take your silence, and you build something new with it. A life that doesn't pause in their absence. A heart that knows the difference between longing and settling. A strength that isn't measured by how much you can give, but by how deeply you can honor yourself. If you've made it here, it means you understand this truth. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is nothing. Not the nothing of indifference, but the nothing that says, I will not chase what will not meet me. If this spoke to you, share it with someone who's learning the same lesson. And if you're ready for more, stay here, because the conversations we have in this space are for those who've learned the quietest moments, are often the most powerful,